Okay, well, most of you have, I think, have worked with me before in some capacity. So, you know how I like to do these things. It's, you know, I have things planned and things I want to talk to you about and share with you and show you, but also I'm very much open to you stopping and asking questions about feedback. And I think when I was, you know, planning this, that the number one takeaway that I hope you do take away is that you have some ideas for how to implement feedback in your class regularly. So you have some tangible things to walk away with. So I have a resource document that I made for you that I'd like to share with you right away. So you have it on hand. You don't have to read through it, but I'll be going through these things throughout the session. So I'm just going to put that in the chat, but we'll also follow up with all the attendees in an email as well. So you should get, let's see if this will work for me. Sometimes it does. Yeah, so there's one called LLI Feedback Resource, Workshop Resources. So that's going to come through. So you should be able to just save that to your own desktop. And if you can't, don't worry, because we'll follow up with you with everything from the workshop. Okay, and I'd just like to take a minute to introduce my Learning Institute colleague, Fatima, who's here with us. She has been so helpful in helping me to prepare this session. Fatima was my student last year, so she's a graduate. She's Mom's graduate, but she was my student in the School of Education and did a lot of work on these kinds of sessions, but also we then hired her at the Learning Institute. And then Fatima did her thesis in the MPhil program on feedback, and she worked in schools with teachers and students on feedback. So I thought she'd be the perfect person to have here with us. I want to start today showing you some feedback that I recently collected in my class. So I'm teaching a graduate class in the MPhil program. And just take a look at this, and I'd like to know your thoughts or comments if you have any. Feel free to just use the raise your hand function too if you would like to ask a question. Okay, I don't expect you to read through it all, but you can kind of see what I'm doing there. Any comments?
Oh, calling on people directly can feel uncomfortable. That's exactly what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Because I feel that normally there is always a small group of students who is more assertive and finds it easier to come forward. So to prevent them to be the ones who always end up contributing, so I call people directly to make sure it's an even playing field. But on the other hand, as you say, it might be that they feel uncomfortable.
Right, so this came from a student, and I don't cold call a lot in my classes, but I did a couple of times in this class, and some student wrote this to me, and I was like, okay, fair enough. So I've started to have to get really creative with how I get students involved and engaged in the class, and what I've come to love with online teaching is the chat box. And if you're open to the chat box being another space where students can participate, there's a lot that can happen in there. But again, the instructor has to be open to that. And some people see the chat box as a distraction, so they don't engage with it, especially if you have large classes. Others, like myself, I think it's just a place where there's been a lot of great sharing and participation going on. And on the second class I had this semester, I had a couple students write to me and say, we love to sit and listen, and we appreciate that you also consider participation in the chat box to be participation in the class. because it gives quieter voices and people who are a bit more shy a chance to participate. So I just wanted to share that with you. So interesting you picked that out. The other thing is, look at the wealth of feedback I got here to inform my teaching. Now, some of it is, yes, about the good things that I was doing, they want me to continue doing. But the start is interesting for me because that's where I get really a good sense of what they might like more of or what they might like me to change. Now, it's impossible for me to do all of this in my next class, but I get a good sense of what's working, what's not, and then the things that might be hindering learning that I might want to stop doing. So I just showed you this off the top to say this was a really easy way that I collected feedback on one class. And this is what I did. It was one question. Okay, what would you like me to continue doing, start doing, and stop doing? I used a Google form, and I gave 3 to 5 minutes at the end of class for this. So just in case anyone's not familiar with Google Forms, I like to show what I do here. Is there anyone who's not familiar with Google Forms? I talk about those a lot here. So it just looked like this. It's a survey form you can create in 5 minutes in Google. So you do, I don't think you need a Google account. You might need a Google account, and it's just part of the Google suite. So you have your email address, your Gmail, your Google Drive, Google Forms is one. And what's nice about it is that you can, click your link here. It's a unique link for every form. And this is what you share with students, okay? And you see here that my responses in that class were 13. And this is what it looks like. And it has you can download it into a spreadsheet if you want to. Sorry, I'm just whipping through this because it's something you'll have to kind of explore on your own. And the spreadsheet you can download on your computer. And what I did with it, as you see, is I summarized it into a simple table like that. Because the critical thing here is, if you're going to collect feedback from students, is to actually collect it, share it back with them so that they know that they've been heard, and also that you can kind of talk a little bit about the improvements you're hoping to make in class. So more on that in a few minutes. I just wanted to give you one quick example though of Google Forms. So we'll come back to that. All right. I see we have a few more people who've joined us. Great. Sarah's there, Amna's there. Welcome, friends. Okay, hello. So a lot of, again, what we do is, nested in educational literature, and so really getting student feedback. Stephen Brookfield considers that to be one of the 4 lenses through which we can view our teaching. Peers and colleagues lenses are another way to look at this. So have a peer come and observe your class, or the feedback that you might have gotten if you took the online summer course with us, or the ISW, one of those courses, peer feedback. Education research literature can give you a lot of insight into what's happening in your class. And then your own self-reflection on what you're doing and how your perspectives and your beliefs might be impacting your teaching. So that's just to show you. So you're looking for feedback. That's why you're here, I'm assuming. But I'll ask you that question back to you is, are you willing to make some changes in response to what students are suggesting? So think about that for yourself. And the research, there's an extensive body of research on, course evaluations, but student feedback as well. Because sometimes I think there's a bit of a difference between the two. End of course evaluations versus good feedback. And one of the things I know we're trying to do at LUMS is to improve the course evaluation system so that it gives you better feedback on your teaching and on what students are learning, versus students are satisfied with your course and your teaching or not. Those are two very different things, right? So the literature says it's worse to ask for feedback and do nothing with it, or ignore it, or defend your teaching, to say, well, thanks for your feedback, but you're all wrong. I do these things for this reason. Well, okay, that's a place to start from, but it's probably not going to take you very far in improving your teaching. So I'd like to just throw a couple of questions out to a few of you who might like to share about what your experiences are with collecting feedback from your students. I'm not talking as much about your end of class evaluations, your end of semester evaluations. I'm talking about other forms of feedback you could collect along the way so that you gauge where students are at from time to time in their learning. So would anyone like to just give us a quick synopsis of, if you've collected feedback, was it a positive, negative experience for you? What did you learn about student learning? Did you do anything with their feedback? Why or why not?
No, I'll go first.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, it's always a mixed bag mostly. So you have comments, both positive, negative, and some neutral ones also don't change anything. Everything is good, and neutral statements. One thing that stands out is very few students are willing to give feedback. So if I keep it anonymous, and not everyone has to give me feedback, so I'll get a response rate of 18 to 20 students in a class of 60. So that's been my otherwise, if I make it compulsory, it's meaningless feedback. I mean, they'll fill it up, but it won't mean much to me. So both I've tried. So it's a you never know when you'll get real good, meaningful feedback. Secondly, what I've learned is that they have different goals. So they're more skewed towards percentages and the instruments of grading. We want to know more about what worked, what didn't work. So somehow there's we're answering a question and they're answering it from their own lens, which is, please reduce the grading percentage, please, and we ask something else, they tell us something else. So it's very difficult for me to translate what exactly do they want to say.
Right.
And then doing something with their feedback, I've been struggling with this. Of course, I'd ideally want to do something, but when you get 3-4 opinions, which we all know that they learn differently. So obviously some of them like forums better, some of them like the chat box better, some of them like to voice their opinions and take the center stage. So when you get 3-4 student types and they tell you that we like this, but we don't like this, how do you balance your response to that? And how do you sort of, by the time you sort of tell them that why you have 4 or 5 grading instruments so that all of them can participate, the class is pretty much over, the session. So I always struggle with these 2-3 points where they just seem to be a mixed bag of opinions and they're not uniform. So how do you sort of pick and choose which one to respond to and how?
Great question.
These are my dilemmas.
So pick and choose, good, mixed bag. I mean, one of the things is, and I'll answer part of your question, and then actually maybe your colleagues have some answers for you here. One of the things is that the good thing is that you're getting people commenting on different things that works for them and that doesn't. And keep in mind, like you're never going to kind of be perfect for everybody, right? But I think what you can do is, what I find works well when I get a mixed bag is that I continue to offer options, right? So that, yes, you try to support as many people as you can in the ways that work for them, but it's impossible to know, especially in the class of 60 or plus, right? So I think some people like chat, so you have that option there. Some people like, other things, so you have that option. And it doesn't cost you anything more or less to be doing those things. So just know, by diversity, having a diverse kind of repertoire of ways that you're engaging students means that more people have a chance to engage, right? Now with feedback though, it's similar in my classes. Like I have a class of 20 and 13 responded to that last feedback form. Do you know why though? It's because I sent them off with it and didn't let them do it in class. And I broke my own #1 rule for collecting feedback. And this is what I get. However, within those 13 responses, I got some great feedback. So, even though I didn't get 100% return, Well,
That's
I
okay.
got 13 people, which gives me a good sense, right? I'll keep coming back to this, that if you really want to get a higher percentage sample of your students with feedback, the best thing to do is give the last 5 minutes of class for this, and you know, don't let them go, you know, like tell them you have to tell them something that's important after they do the feedback. So,
Okay.
and it's never required in the sense that they have to do it or they get penalized. That's not it. But what this does is that it tells your students, okay, I value your feedback, so I'm going to give up some of my time, like my class time or our class time, to hear your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So it makes it part of the lesson rather than, you know, separate from the lesson.
Correct.
So I'm going to go over to Hadia and then Amna. And so Hadia.
Yes, I just wanted to share an experience, and I think most colleagues will vouch for this. I always get the largest number of students who generally tend to stay quiet, even them engaging if I ask for feedback on assessments, on oh, sorry, my daughter is here. Let me deal with her. I'll just come back. Sorry.
So Amna, maybe you go ahead, and then when Hadia is back.
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry for being late. Right, so yes, I've been collecting a lot of feedback in the past also, and what I've discovered is that what I've been doing wrong, and I've just learned recently, is that I've been asking very generalized questions.
Yeah.
So did you enjoy the class? What did you think? What did you learn? And from my experience with the ISW and now with the ISI that I'm enrolled in, I have learned that it's best to ask students specific questions about specific parts of the lesson. And as a result, I've been getting very useful feedback. And yes, many times the feedback is a mixed bag, just like Sarah said. But then what I have done is, yes, provide a lot of options. Not even just after the ISI and the ISW, but I've been doing this for quite a few years. For example, and looking at the feedback that I've always had at the end of the course, that students sometimes don't enjoy the end of the project exercise. Some of them are not. They're all different types of learners. So I've been giving them, based on their feedback, that they've always said that we don't enjoy writing the research paper, or we don't enjoy the presentation. And so what I've done is I give them options. So I tell them, all right, you want to make a video, you want to write out a formal research paper, you want to do a presentation, whatever it is that you feel like doing, there is an option. I give them guidelines for all the options and they do it. And the feedback from there is that, yes, this is something that they have really enjoyed. And they feel like they've been heard, right? So that's my takeaway, that if you have to bring in a change, if you take feedback like you've been saying, otherwise they just don't, because their first complaint is, why should we give feedback? Nothing's going to happen as a result, right? So you have to show them that you are willing to make a change, and you do make a change. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to share.
Well, Anna just summed up, like, you know, 2 more of the parts of this presentation really well. So that's great. Yeah, I'll go back to Hadia if you had something to say, and then Antonio, and then we'll move forward into some examples for you.
Yeah, so actually, Amna really covered what I wanted to say, which was that they then respond very well if you actually implement what they've asked for. And so then here, what I tend to do is I tend to sometimes give options which we can easily implement. And that's what I've done even when I'm changing assessment. So something that I know as an instructor, I can actually implement for my students, and then students then, and that sort of then opened the doorway for me to get further feedback from students, because they see that, okay, the instructor listened to me, she implemented what I was asking for. And then that allows sort of a gateway into other aspects of the course too.
Excellent. Thank you, Amna. Antonio, please go. Sorry, I mean, Hadia. Amna, then Hadia. Antonio, go ahead.
So I wanted to particularly emphasize one point that Sarah made, which is actually when you ask feedback to students, you see that they have overwhelming concern and a very strong bias towards grading rather than towards learning. The grading is so important for them. So if you so that is what makes it difficult to act on that feedback, because of course you want to optimize the grading, but you also want to make sure that the learning is also being optimized.
Yeah, great point, Antonio. There's always that, and it shouldn't be a trade-off, right? And that's one of the things I think, you know, my quick answer, my quick response to this notion of grading, the focus on grading, you're right, and we've done that to them. You know, I mean, we being, you know, our society and our systems, right? Our education systems have done that to them. But so that's a larger conversation for another time. But in terms of feedback, it's what I've found I've had to do is start kind of slowly trying to shift the culture in my classroom, like slowly. So I mean, a bit at a time, where, you know, I collect feedback once, like I did there. And I talk to students about it. And I say, the reason I'm doing this is so I can know how to better improve your learning experience in the class, which is going to, you know, which will benefit you. And I mean, if you want to say it's going to benefit your learning, which for some of you might benefit your grades, I mean, maybe, right? But it's about also about how you talk about the feedback in the class before you do it, after you do it. And remember, students are not used to trusting feedback or feedback mechanisms, right? They don't have a lot of faith in the course evaluation systems that we have. So a big thing is to not link the feedback to those course evaluations so much as to link to like an ongoing check-in, so you can work on how to improve, you know, their learning experience. And if you take the angle where you say, you know, this course is, it takes two of us, right? It takes the teacher, but it takes the students as well for this to work. You know, without students, who are we as teachers? So I think making them part of the process, if you can, in some of the ways our colleagues have said to do that, can start to kind of lay the tracks for that, you know, that shifting that perspective on feedback in the class from, you know, oh my gosh, I only care about grading, to, okay, I can see my prof is starting to make a few changes here. The class is improving a bit. I'm enjoying it a bit more. Like, you'll be surprised how those little changes can have an impact on the students. That's what I've learned from doing it. But okay, so Amna, and then we'll.
Right. So I just wanted to address this thing that Antonio brought up. Another thing that has it's been proven very useful for me is that I tell them that the feedback is going to help me make the grading process better for them and for me, right? And then that is also an incentive. Plus, of course, bringing in the concept of enjoyment and loving for enjoying learning for the sake of learning. When you keep talking about these concepts in the class with them from day one, they do want to give feedback on how to make it more interesting for them and how to make it more enjoyable, and plus, of course, make the grading better. But then again, you have to apply their some of the suggestions they make.
Yeah, thank you, Amna. I believe that you know, if we expect them to change their mindsets around feedback, we have. I need to model that. Yeah, Elias?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, really, you give good feedback. I think that's your insight is very good. If conflicting feedback is coming, because as you mentioned, is the different learning taker and there are different majors. So total conflicting feedback comes. So how you cope it?
I just had an incident like that happen, Ilyas, actually. Yeah. So I just got feedback like that, that for one day, because I've been taking feedback very regularly for the ISI. So I got, in one lesson, I got students to say that, all right, she should show the video clippings on her screen and screen share because it will get better for us. Then I did that for them. And then the next time I got the feedback that she should let us watch the videos because there is a screen lag and it's better if we get to watch the videos in our own time. So give us 5 minutes and then we'll watch it. Okay, so then the third time what I've planned to do now is that I'll give them an option that here you are, I'm going to put it on my screen. You can, if you want to watch it with me, watch it with me. Otherwise, go off and watch it on your own. So then वही बात आ जाती है, you know, it comes down to the same thing that you have to provide options. That's how I've dealt with it.
That's very helpful, Amna. Thank you. I would say, Ilyas, too, if it's a, well, I'm going to come to this really next. Is what are your goals for collecting feedback, right? So, and is the feedback you're getting helping you to achieve those goals for improvement in your class? So this conflicting feedback that you're getting, if it's a central core part of your teaching that, you know, then that's something to really pay attention to, I think. So I don't know if you want to, you know, share what the topic was about the feedback, but like, I look at everything and then realize there's only certain decisions that I'm prepared to make in terms of making changes, right? I'm not prepared to change the whole class based on every different piece of feedback I get, because I still have, you know, some expertise, you know, quite a bit of expertise in, you know, designing my classes and in presenting my subjects and whatnot, right? But students have expertise in their learning experiences, right? And that's what we want to hear from them on. So if it's things like, you know, I like the way you organize the, you know, the content versus I'm so confused by the way you organize the content because it seems to be all over the place. For example, there's conflicting feedback. Well, to me, there's something going on there, like with, you know, you can take a look, you can probe for further feedback there. You know, maybe the next time you ask for feedback, you look at that one area and get more students' opinions on that. So then you get, you know, you get a better sense of what's really going on in the class as a whole. And if you have one student who's standing out from the rest, you may want to say, you know, listen, if there's people who are really experiencing this in a different way, and, you know, then that might be, you know, a case for meeting with students one-on-one. Now, I'm just taking that example of, you know, if it's organization of content, that's just one area, right? So, I mean, there's no kind of hard, like, easy answer, not hard answer. There's no easy answer to say, what do you do with it? But it's like, what would you do with it if it were something else in your life where you got conflicting feedback? I'd probably seek another opinion, right? Just like if I'm going to a doctor, because I broke my arm, you know, something's wrong with my arm, I'd probably seek a third impartial opinion, and then you have to make decisions based on that. So all throughout this, I want to say the pedagogical decision making always rests with you, not with your students, with you, because you're responsible for the course, for the teaching, but we're using students as experts in their learning, not experts in our subjects, but in their learning, to kind of get a better sense of how can we close the gap between what we think we're doing to support them and then what we're actually doing to support them. And is there any kind of, you know, how can we make these kind of come together a lot more seamlessly? So I keep asking these great questions because I think more than any content I can present to you is being able to hash out, you know, the issues or the successes and everything you've been having with feedback here. So for the rest of the session, I'd like to give you examples of 3 different ways you might think about getting feedback from your students regularly. And they go from more, kind of simple and quick to implement down to something that would require a bit more planning. But I wanted to show you the range depending on what you're interested in. So I think we need to zoom out for a second though and say, students they also have some worries and fears when it comes to giving you feedback. And this is from research literature. I think Fatima and I had a big talk about this too. And she said, as a student, she told me some of her stories about having to give, feedback to faculty and what it felt like sometimes and what helped to make it feel better for her to give feedback. But these are some things. Students are worried that, faculty might not notice the important things in the feedback. So sometimes they just give general feedback because they don't believe that we're going to, decode it or translate it. Someone said translate it. And to those of you who are having the issues with feedback that's just very general or you don't know what it means, I mean, there is some translating and decoding work that has to go on here. So if someone's saying they're not liking something, we need to read deeper into what that means. Like if I don't like something, there's something wrong with the situation for me, right? So the article that I sent to you in that resource package, I thought was just great. It came from a blog post and it helps you to kind of decode or translate some of the common feedback that we get in course evaluations. It's worth taking a look at because the author really, like, she'll pull out a typical question that we ask and say, well, if your students answer this, look a little bit deeper because this is probably what they're trying to get at. And I found it really helpful to do that. So, and there's some other things here. They feel that it might upset faculty. Some of them really care and think, am I actually being helpful enough to you, with giving this? And then the big one is the grade. The grade, is this going to impact my grade? And I think the most ethical thing you can do here is to never, ever, ever tie feedback to grades in terms of saying, which is something I know it's a practice we're trying to get rid of at LUMS, to say you can't access Zambil until you give course feedback, because it just, I mean, I feel terrible about that as a faculty member here who I care about the feedback I get. And I don't like that personally, but that's why we're suggesting, and I'm really trying to, hit home the point is, don't wait till the end of semester evaluation. If you really want to know what's happening, collect feedback more regularly, right? So very quickly, these are some common beliefs that come from personal experiences of talking to a lot of faculty over the last few years. So students can't give good feedback on teaching because they're not experts in teaching or my subject. True, but part of that is not true. Undergrads are not mature enough to give useful feedback on teaching. So these are beliefs. These are beliefs that I've heard people express at LUMS too about students. So I'm going to suggest, let's frame these, let's flip these another way. And I'd ask you to think about it if you hold those beliefs about students right now, and I'll challenge you on those to flip those. So students may not be experts on teaching or my subject, but they're experts on their experiences of learning in my course and in your courses, right? And then this is a long one, but if asked good questions that focus on their learning, all students can be capable of reporting back honest feedback about what they learn, don't learn, and what they're experiencing in my class in terms of what activities help them to learn and those that don't. So I have to believe that they have the capability to do it if I set them up for success in doing that, right? So the only way to really know what's happening with students in their learning is to ask them directly, to assess them, or maybe there's other ways that you've thought of to think about, like, I can make a lot of assumptions about students are learning, what students are learning or not, and we often do that. You know, have you ever been in a lecture where at the end of class you said, okay, are there any questions? Is everyone clear on that? Did you understand the concept? You know, and no one raises their hand, so we think, okay, they've learned. But sometimes that's false feedback, because there are a myriad of reasons why students won't tell you at the end of class. You know, they're shy, or they're just too lost. They don't even know what to tell you. They know you're in a rush to leave class. They're in a rush to leave class. Like, there's so many factors, right? So let's think of other ways. So the literature tells us that feedback makes a difference to teachers when it reveals something new to us, when we're motivated to actually improve the course or to improve our lessons, and then when we know how to improve. So it's all fine for me to sit here and, you know, give you these great feedback forms and you use them with the class, and then you don't know how to make the changes or to do something different, right? So that's where I think we can help you, your peers, your colleagues, with the Learning Institute as well, through some of the initiatives we have, such as this workshop, but also Amna and Sarah both referred to a course that we're doing right now, and they're in it, called the ISI, which is Instructional Skills Implementation course. And it's all about getting feedback on your real-time teaching. Through videos and things like that. You know, it's happening virtual right now. And maybe, you know, you can ask Sarah and Amna about their experiences in that. We're in week 3, I think. So we'll come back to that. So those are some ways. Okay, so I want you to think for a moment before I go through examples. What are your goals for gathering feedback on your teaching? So I'm not going to do that. We won't do the free write, but maybe you want to jot something down here. What do you really want to find out about? Is it about engagement? Are people engaged? Are you and they meeting course expectations? Do you want to assess whether they're learning something along the way? Or do you want to learn their perspectives on something very specific about your teaching? So maybe it was, okay, today I tried breakout rooms with Zoom for the very first time, and I want to know what you thought of it. That's a very specific question to an activity that you did in class. You can ask more general questions that are good general questions. Amna mentioned that asking generalized questions don't give you much feedback. When your questions are too vague, you're going to get answers that are all over the place that might not help you, right? So we're going to talk about questions and that they matter. So whatever your goals are, maybe it's not something that's on here. You have your own goal. The questions that you ask students in the feedback needs to help achieve those goals. Okay, we're all researchers here, or most of us are researchers, have done research, whether it's, you know, academic research or market research or whatever. The questions you ask in your study have to, and the methods you follow, those methods have to help you answer that research question, right? So whatever your goals or your purposes are, I think you get the point if we compare it to research here. So I want to compare some types of questions. Hadia, go ahead.
Can a goal of feedback just be that you give them a question, ask them for feedback, just with the express purpose of increasing their engagement? So the idea that the instructor is asking me how to improve something, and just the act of doing that improves student engagement.
For sure, absolutely. So if your goal is to improve student engagement, then your feedback questions or the act of doing feedback is a form of engagement, sure. But you could ask feedback, like specific questions, which I'll show you some good examples in a minute of questions you could ask to kind of gauge their engagement in learning as well in your course. Yeah, don't get this, let's not let this get too complicated here, because if it's too complicated, we won't do it, right? So let's think about, I think when you see some good examples of questions, you can say, oh yeah, I can adapt those. That's useful for me. That's not useful for me. Yeah. Antonio, I saw that you had your hand up, but that might have been from last time. Is that?
Yep, from last
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay. So quick comparison on the screen here between types of questions. The questions on the left are, they're actually older questions. A couple of them are older questions from your former course evaluation. The questions on the right are questions that tell us more about learning. So you might have noticed if you taught if you got your student evaluations in May, that there was a new student evaluation form, because we purposely wanted to pilot a feedback form that talked more about students learning than it did, satisfaction in the course. So courses like the instructor was fair and impartial with me. The problem with that question is that what does fair and impartial mean? It's very vague. It's like, I have to even think about that. Like, if they have to think too much about it, it's not a good question. The instructor began classes on time. Yes, she did. No, she didn't. I like her because she did. I don't like her because she didn't. It was, that doesn't tell me a lot about learning. I'm not saying don't use these questions. I'm just saying that they're not going to tell you much about student learning if that's your goal. So the questions on the right-hand side are more of what I'm promoting in this session. These are the kinds of questions that we'd suggest you use if you really want to probe into learning. And then you can see how you can look at different aspects, right? So of course, these would be, you would use some kind of Likert scale with these. And Fatima has designed a bit of a survey for you that you might want to use based on the new LUMS survey, which I'll share in a few minutes. Okay, so to go into our first type of feedback you could get from students, these are short survey forms and other kinds of responses. So at the top of the workshop today, at the beginning of the workshop, I showed you start, stop, or continue, start, stop. Very quick, easy to implement. It tells you lots of different things about your teaching. It's not specific to one thing, but the rule of thumb is when you're collecting feedback, keep it brief. No, I would say no more than 4 questions, and should be able to be completed within about 5 minutes. Okay. Again, I've already talked about how critical it is to give time during class, and I'll be the first to admit sometimes I don't, and the result is that not many people answer. It also sends the message that, oh, okay, like ho hum, I don't have to give feedback, but when I make it a part of the culture of the class, it does help. You can do, I say strictly anonymous. That helps some students be able to kind of speak more freely and give you honest feedback. You can set that setting in the Google form where you don't ask for their email address or anything. You just have the questions and it's anonymous. Properly prefaced, explain what you'll do with the feedback and the info and why they should take it seriously. So I guess this is to Amna's point about model what you expect from people by how you talk about the feedback, and that you'll use it, that you'll follow up on it. Yeah, so here are some examples of questions you can ask students. Don't be shocked. There's a lot of text on the screen, but it's just purposefully to show you different types. These are also in that resource document I gave you, so you can easily copy and paste them into a Google form, into a chat box, whatever you want to do. So there's kind of 2 types you could look for. One is feedback on your teaching, your techniques, and your activities you do in class. Are these, so this is to Hadia's point about engagement. Are these types of activities working to include or to engage students? So you can ask which parts were most engaging, which parts were least engaging. You can ask for suggestions for things that you could do to make them feel more engaged. Then suggestions to enhance the lesson class activity. So you can see it's putting it back on the student to think about the impact on their learning, rather than a general question about, how did you know, would you prefer this or that kind of thing, right? So, and then there are others on the handout I gave you. The second type of questions are about the learning that's happening. So it's not necessarily how the learning is happening, but the learning is happening or not. So some questions you could ask, just gonna flip through these pretty quickly. Questions to gauge their interest, questions to gauge the relevance of what you're doing in class. Remember, one of the key things we learn from educational research is, and learning theory is that when students find what they're learning to be valuable and relevant, they're more engaged and more likely to, you know, to learn more deeply and so on, and to take more from it. So you might be interested in finding that out. You might be interested in finding out about their attitudes towards what you're asking them or what you're teaching them. You might want them to think more analytically. So start pushing them to express their learning a bit more deeply here. Or have they been able to make connections between what you taught today and what you taught last week, or even what they were learning in other courses? So you can kind of see how the questions you choose can elicit different types of answers about learning. My suggestion to you is, why not do both at the same time? So make this easy on yourself and on them. Is next time you want to collect feedback on an activity you've done, also see what they're learning. So you see this combination of teaching questions and then learning/content questions. Okay. Stop me if you have questions about like how you would, I mean, if it's not straightforward in terms of how you would use these and implement these. Pick and choose, mix and match from those lists that I've given you, and even mix and match the way you go about getting the feedback. Google Forms is but one. Here's some other ideas. So when we finally, you know, get back to in-person classes, you may want to bring in some index cards to your class and hand them out and say, put a question up on your PowerPoint and get them to quickly write their answers on an index card to you, anonymous, and they hand them to you or the TA as they walk out the door, or they set them on the desk or something like that. I've done this, I like it sometimes, but if I want to keep an electronic record of my feedback, which is what I do, so that I can use it for, you know, other purposes, then that means I have to type it out or have, you know, one of my partners type it out or something like that. So it's up to you. I've heard of people doing feedback through WhatsApp groups. So you post the question you want to ask them on the class WhatsApp group, and they're just texting it. Facebook class group works well. A Twitter hashtag is another thing people do. I haven't tried that yet. I'm not a big tweeter myself, but you know, go for it. So you can play with different ways to do this. And I would say if you haven't collected this kind of feedback from your students before, start easy make it easy for yourself first, and then start experimenting with different ways you might do this. Another is an email survey. You can do it this way, but remember, you may want to give time for them to start it in class. That'll be your call, because it is going to impact, like this wouldn't be able to be anonymous unless you could find a way to anonymize the emails, but I don't think you could. But here are some ideas. Those are other examples of questions you could ask in an email survey. If you have a TA, this is a great role for them to play here too, is they can send out these questions on your behalf. Please, if I'm rolling through these too quickly, let me know. So another thing we've decided to do for you that we thought might be helpful is maybe some of you want to do midterm feedback using the form that you use at the end of the term. So you can see some consistency maybe across the same questions. So I didn't insert the screenshot, but I'm just going to share it to you. So Fatima has kindly done a mock-up for us of the new LUMS course evaluation, using the questions from the May course evaluation form, we put them in a Google form. You can see here, these questions are all about learning. And you're free to take this. We can share this link with you, and you can just I would ask you to just make a duplicate of the form, because otherwise the Learning Institute will have all of your feedback forms, right? So you don't want that. So I'm not in the edit setting right now, but we'll make sure that that's open to you. Actually, I'd like to hear from you here. What would be useful? Would you like us to send you this Google form as is, or would you write rather like a Word document copy? And you can then set it up however you'd like. A Word document copy? Yeah, okay. Okay, so maybe we can do this up in Word, and then the doc would be better. And then you can do whatever you need to with it. So that's another way you can collect feedback. I would suggest using this at midterm, because they're gonna do it again at the end of the semester. This is, and you can tell them, this is anonymous. You could make this anonymous. And it's not linked to them being able to access their grades. Explain to them why you're using the same feedback form. That's all I would say, is give them some background with that. Okay, so they're not wondering, you know, oh my gosh, am I going to be locked out of my grades in October if I don't do this? That's not the case. Okay, so that's another way, folks, we can do feedback. And are there, please pop up your hands if you have any questions, or jump in, because I'm kind of just going through these examples. The other is so now we're getting into the more kind of not complex, but the types of feedback sessions that would require a bit more planning on your part. Everything up until this point is something you can do quite quickly. Your TAs can help. But here I think is something where you can learn a lot by having someone else help you. So having someone else be the liaison between you and your students. So think about a research project where you might be, you know, wanting to have more of a deeper discussion with people about your research questions. So in this case, we're inviting you to reach out to the Learning Institute to say, I'd like to have someone help me collect feedback on my teaching through a focus group. And this requires a bit of planning on your part, because you have to give up some class time for this one. So here, one of the Learning Institute staff, it might be myself, it might be Fatima, someone else, observes your class for the whole class. And then in the last 25 minutes of class, you as the instructor would leave, and we would run focus, like a discussion with your students based on questions that you and I have predetermined that you want to ask them. So you have specific goals you want to learn about, but mainly you focus on the strengths, what's helping them, what's hindering their learning, that kind of thing. And after that, the Learning Institute prepares the feedback for you. We do a bit of a report, like a summary of the feedback, and then we meet. So that's the key here, is that we meet for a follow-up discussion and talk with you about this. The benefits of doing this is that you have someone to help you kind of translate what students are saying, but we are also in the position to kind of offer some suggestions for how to implement different changes. And I think that's where, you know, that's what can be helpful. I think it's one of the benefits I know our colleagues get from the course they're taking with us. So Elias, go ahead.
That's probably not a bit relevant, but I think any of you can comment. So I think I already get valuable feedback from Sarah and Amna. They can both comment. I'm just really curious about and wondering about my classes. I got 40 students, but 42. Some of them, let's see, can I divide them in 10 at least not contributing at all. Probably I don't know whether shy, another, even I can't understand learning process much about because of online. So do you have any idea or give me any sort of feedback? How can I engage these students? Even I try to cold call, but basically I don't want that, but I still try. But some of students, probably let's say 10, 12, they're not contributing at all. Despite the fact I encourage them, you can speak, we can do separate Zoom, or you want to come WhatsApp one-to-one. So just wondering, do you have any tips for me?
Yeah, I have a similar problem in my class. I'm sure others do as well. So if others want to jump in here, I'm just mindful of the time. We have a couple minutes left. So Amna, you go ahead and I'll add if
Okay, very concisely, provide them with a whole lot of options. That's what I do. There is the chat box. Then on Google, I use Google Classroom for my courses. So there are always little questions related to the lecture there, and I encourage them to answer those. Those are MCQs type questions. And I tell them that's where they will get their participation marks also, plus it helps them stay focused, right? So chat box, WhatsApp group, we have that. I ask them to comment in that as well, and Google Classroom. These are the three things that I'm using. And I've noticed that even the quiet ones, if you keep pushing them every class, they respond.
I think you could, Elias, another thing that I do, so this is how I kind of skirt around this issue of feedback not counting for grades. I do tell my students that providing feedback is one of the ways that I consider participation as well. So, and I give a grade, I give 15% for participation in my class. Giving feedback is another way they can participate in the class, because I believe that that's participating in their own learning and in the improving of their own learning. Now, I don't necessarily dock them participation marks if they don't give it, but it's another way I talk about feedback as participation in my class. And to add to what Amna is saying, I highly do recommend trying to expand your own repertoire of ways and options for students to engage. So you took the course with us in the summer and noticed like we had some things going on in the chat box where you guys were participating. We, you know, we had a lot of people who didn't talk in that course this summer. However, you talked when we sent you off in small groups. So participation increased when we lowered the numbers of people in the main Zoom session, right? So, I mean, I encourage you, if you haven't tried a breakout room yet with your students, to give it a try. It doesn't matter which class you teach. I'm working with Mohammed Zahir right now. He's a chemist and in SSE, and he just tried, in chemistry, he just tried breakout discussions in his class, you know, for the first time recently. And I just want to say, like, I commend anyone who's not used to teaching in that kind of more groupy work style to try it out, because especially online where you cannot tell, because people have their videos off and they have like all these things, you can't really tell, right? We rely on that hand being raised, that blue hand, or someone jumping in and speaking and answering our questions. It's even trickier online. So you do have to explore. So I'd encourage you to, Elias, to try something in that regard. Okay, so just the last few minutes, folks. I'll just be about 3 more minutes and then we'll kind of let it rest. I think the big thing is to communicate with the students about what you're doing. Let them know you're going to collect feedback, especially if you choose to do the group discussion style with the LLI. Definitely inform them that this is going to happen and why. And I think Amna made the point is from day one, start making feedback part of your teaching. Then it becomes part of the culture of your class. And here's just some of the ways I think I've reiterated how having someone else help you to digest the feedback can help, especially I would say if you get a lot of feedback. Another step that you could take if you find you're ready for it is to join our pedagogical partnership program in the spring. So we'll be putting out a call for faculty who are teaching, who wish to have a student partner with them for this whole purpose of course improvement, collecting feedback on their teaching, and working together with a student to have that student perspective on your teaching regularly. So the Learning Institute actually pays students to work with faculty to do this. So it's a pretty sweet deal. We have a limited number of people we take, but you just have to apply to the program. You'll get an email from the Learning Institute, maybe even me directly later on. So probably in around December, where we'll be looking to recruit for the spring term. So consider that, I've given you in your handout, I've given you the information about what the student partner role would look like in your class. And yeah, one of the problems is giving up class time. I see Antonio's comment. You're absolutely right. We're pressed for time as it is in our classes. And all I can say to that is, it's a choice you do have to make. You have all the information you have about the benefits of doing it in class time versus, the downfalls of doing it after class time. You've seen an example from me about what happens when you do it after class time. And the bottom line is, are you getting enough feedback, right? So you can choose. I would say try it. If you can't give up class time, in the last 2 minutes of your class, say, hey folks, here's a Google form. I'm asking you to fill this out. I want to learn about what you've been learning so I can improve the course. Please do it now. Please do it even in the last 5 minutes after you log off, and see what you get. Do your own kind of little experiment with it. That's what I would suggest, Antonio. And then working through the feedback, I think it's easy to get hung up on that negative comment. That's the one we'll remember for the next 20 years, that one negative one, but it's one negative comment out of a sea of, other good and mediocre comments. So keep in mind, a negative comment does not always, especially if it's one, if it's several about the same thing, then that's a red flag for you to pay attention to. But if it's one, people are human, feedback is emotional, teaching is vulnerable, learning is emotional. That student could have just had a fight with their mother 3 seconds before they logged on, and you're asking them to rate your teaching and they feel really cranky. Like, keep that in mind, right? If someone is really coming out and saying, listen, this is happening in my class, in your class with me. I'm getting bullied in the chat box or harassed, or that's serious. And you all know, that's judgment calls, right? And that requires other support. But don't get totally hung up on the negative, but don't disregard it as well. Take a look at it, interpret it, try to translate it for yourself to see what could this really mean if we kind of get under the skin of it. And then the best rule of thumb you have is look at the whole. Okay, look at the whole of the feedback and say, what are kind of the themes here for me to really consider? And if you have a lot of negative feedback, to me, that's a flag to say there may be a disconnect between what you intend to do, what you intend for students to learn, and what they're actually learning. So that's when you can start to really look at, okay, what am I doing? And maybe this guides you in collecting more specific feedback on certain things later. Or maybe you just want to pick up the phone and hop on Zoom and call me or Fatima or someone at the Learning Institute to say, listen, here's my negative feedback I'm getting. Why? Why am I getting so much? And we can help ask you questions directly to kind of start to get to the heart of the matter, right? So that's an easy, quick way to do it. And then I would recommend share the feedback back with your class, much like I did at the beginning of the class with that one slide. It's a summary. It doesn't have everything verbatim, but you get an idea. You can do a handout, you can do a PowerPoint, and please remember, you don't have to commit to making every single change that the students give you. You need to take this holistically and start looking at the things that are doable, right? And the students will notice, they will, because I've gotten feedback, I've heard from colleagues who've gotten feedback at the end of the semester where they will tell you if they notice. It's not just the people who want to complain who will speak out. The students who have a lot of good things to share will too. And then, you know, our final words of wisdom is know your tendencies. Are you someone who gets defensive when you get feedback? If you are, okay, know that. Just know that about yourself and say, okay, I'm being defensive here. I need to put on a new pair of glasses, a new lens. Disentangle the what from the who, right? It's feedback. It's not that person, but it's the feedback. Don't shoot the messenger. Be curious. Be curious to learn more about the feedback. Okay, what could this mean? It's a lot of negative feedback. It sucks, but what could it mean? Ask for one thing, engage in small experiments. So start small. So if you take away anything, take away that and a couple of ways that you might be able to start small. And then, are you ready for it? Here's some, you know, questions for you just to think about. Are you open? Will you commit to making one change even that the students suggest? And then that's where we end. And thanks for your time. I went a few minutes over. We started a few minutes late. But I just want to throw it over to you. If you have to go, please go ahead, but I'm happy to stay online for another few minutes if you have more questions. I hope this was helpful. Yeah, okay, great. You know, one of my goals at the in my role at the Learning Institute is to try to make these pieces connect together better at LUMS. So we've made some strides to pilot a new course evaluation that is more focused on learning. You know, we're gonna have our bumps with that. And now we're trying to build in these kinds of opportunities for faculty to think more about, you know, feedback on teaching more regularly, right? So like these things need to connect, you know. And the next thing is doing what you're doing here is having discussions about what you're trying to do and what you're learning about teaching. So we're trying to build a community of support around this as well, so that it doesn't have to be so darn lonely teaching and figuring out your teaching. That's what this is. So thanks. It's really nice to see some like recurring faces over time. So yeah, let me know if there's anything else. We'll follow with with the PowerPoint, with the link to the recording and anything else. So please get in touch anytime.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Fatma. Thank you, Lorna.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
I guess if any of you go back to your schools and think that something like this might be useful to do at the school level or whatever, talk to your colleagues and let me know, and we can always like repeat something similar or do something tailored as well. Okay?
Great.
Hello, office. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye, Antonio. Fatima, it's just us.
Hi.
Wait,